Glide baits look intimidating, but choosing your first one doesn't have to be complicated or expensive. In this video, I'm breaking down exactly what to look for in a starter glide bait so you don't waste money and you don't get frustrated. What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, I'm Dane. I fish out of a kayak a lot all across Missouri, fish a lot of swim baits in my free time, and I try to implement them in tournaments a lot. Glide baits can absolutely catch big fish, but only if you kind of start in the right place. Most anglers will give up on glide baits pretty early for one reason: they start with the wrong bait. Some of the common issues are they start too big because they kind of go all or nothing. They look at them and they just think that's too expensive. They get something that fishes a little too fast for what is comfortable, or they get something that is just not going to really achieve the action that they're looking for without some advanced rod work, and that really turns people off from it. Your first glide bait should be easy to fish, forgiving, and confidence building. I made this mistake as well, and that big guy right up there above my head there, that was my first glide bait that I ever tried to fish, and it was a mess. If I would have stuck with that one for very much longer, I probably would not fish glide baits today. And then kind of rolling off of that, bigger is not always better whenever you're starting out. Like somewhere around 5 to 7 inches is kind of that sweet spot that you would really like to stay in whenever you're first learning how to fish a glide bait, because like 5 inches is super approachable. 7 is starting to get up there to where you feel like you're fishing a really big bait, but a lot of fish will still eat them. That 5 to 7 inch sweet spot, it's still going to get bites, but it's not going to overwhelm your gear or overwhelm your confidence. Another hugely important thing that you're going to want to pay attention to whenever you're picking out that glide bait is going to be the sink rate on it, because a lot of them will just sink a little bit too fast for you to be able to fish comfortably. Floating glide baits, they serve a purpose, but they're kind of a situational thing a lot of the time. You're going to want to find that slow sink or super slow sink or whatever, and just kind of stick to that until you really figure them out. A slower sink gives you more control and more time in the strike zone. You can pause it for longer right over top of that brush pile or right next to it or whatever, and just kind of have it hang out there and slowly sink, slowly drop, and trigger a lot of those bites. Whereas if you get a fast sink, you just got to keep it running the whole time, and you'll lose confidence rather quickly. One really big thing that I noticed whenever I was learning how to fish a glide bait, and really any bait for that matter, is like whenever I can picture what that bait is doing underwater, even whenever I can't see it with my own two eyes, just being able to visualize what is going on down there, that really, really helps me have some confidence whenever I'm fishing. Just knowing that your drop shot worm is sitting straight out there and wobbling while you're twitching it or whatever. That's a polar opposite example of a glide bait, but the same thing. I want to have confidence that I know what that bait is doing down there even whenever I can't see it. So if you go with something that's too fast and it's getting down there too deep and you're worried about hanging up in a brush pile or whatever, you're just not going to fish it effectively. If you get a slow sink that stays in the top 3 or 4 feet of the surface, whenever you're fishing it at like a decent pace and not counting it down, something like that's just going to give you a lot more confidence whenever you're starting out, because you'll be able to visualize what it's doing better because you're closer to the surface. You're going to want to look for action over realism. A perfect paint job or the perfect shape doesn't really matter if that bait isn't going to glide the way you want it to. Whenever you're starting out, you're going to want to look for something with like a wide, predictable glide, not something that's going to do something crazy under the water that you're just not going to know what it's doing, just like what I was talking about earlier. You're going to want something that responds well to like just simple reel turns, and you're going to want to get something that doesn't take like a lot of rod inputs, because the reel inputs are a lot easier to learn early on than your rod inputs. By that I mean like causing the action off the reel instead of off of twitching the rod or whatever. So if you can find something that's got those consistent actions off of the reel turns, then it'll help you build a lot of confidence a lot quicker. If you have to work too hard to make it swim, it's not going to be a beginner bait. It's not going to be something that you want to really spend a lot of time with until you learn how to fish them. There's a lot of options out there for like multi-jointed baits. You can see a few of them behind me here. There's some one-piece baits. I got one laying here. There's a bunch of different options there, but generally speaking, a two-piece glide, one joint in the middle. That's going to be the easiest place to start. They're kind of the most forgiving if you get a little crazy with some of your reel inputs, your rod inputs. They're easier to control. They're super consistent in the action, so you'll be able to predict what they do a little bit better. Multi-jointed baits or the no-jointed baits, the single-piece baits that I just showed you, stuff like that, they're super awesome. They catch fish. They're great. They work really, really well. They're just not perfect for a beginner. They're not a great place to start. They're not perfect for your first one. If you're kind of sticking to that 5 to 7 inch range that you really should kind of stick to whenever you're starting out, you don't need a dedicated swim bait setup. That's where a lot of guys get kind of screwed up, is they think that they've got to go get an 8-foot extra heavy or something crazy like that, where they're going to be spending $200 or $300 on the rod, and you don't need a 300 or 400 size reel where you're going to have to spend another $200 or $300 on that. It's just not necessary. If you've got like a 7-foot to a 7.6 heavy or even 7.6 medium heavy for some of them lighter glide baits, something like that, your jig rod, your standard flip and stick, whatever, something like that's going to work just fine. Generally speaking, you're going to want one of them little bit slower gear ratio reels, something like a 6.3 to 1 gear ratio, or maybe even the 5.4 or whatever. Get down there to some of them little bit slower speeds, mostly because they have a higher max drag, and they're going to have a little bit more torque to work those baits and to winch those fish into the boat. You can also get too fast and then to where you're just kind of working crazy under the water, and if you're able to slow it down, you just have a little bit more control. Whenever you're starting out, your line doesn't need to be anything fancy. 15, 20 pound mono, copolymer, fluoro, whatever. A lot of guys do like Berkley big game. I personally don't like that at all. I like a P-line C21 or whatever fluoro I'm using at the time. I've got some like 17 pound Invisex that I've been using for some of this stuff. That you can do whatever. You don't have to go crazy. You don't have to get the big game FC, Cigar, whatever, really expensive stuff. Just whatever you got, 15 to 20 pounds, just try to match it up with your weight of your bait. If you're going on the lighter end, if you've got a 5-inch bait, you can get away with 15-pound line. If you're throwing a 7-inch bait, you might want to jump up to 17 to 20. If your jig setup can comfortably throw like a 1 to 2 ounce bait, then you're golden. You don't need anything more than that whenever you're just starting out. Your first glide bait does not need to be $100 or more. A good guideline to kind of stick to there for your first glide bait, or your first several even, is like $15 to $40 range, somewhere in there. You get too much outside of that, and then you're getting real nervous about losing them. You go too much lower than that, and you're probably going to end up with a piece of junk. Not saying that everything in that $15 to $40 range is really worth its weight, but a lot of them are. You're learning, you're just starting out with this, you're going to nick it up, you're going to bang it into stuff, you're going to hit it onto dock pilings, and you're going to hit it onto bridge pilings. You're going to beat them up. It just happens. You might even lose them, you might snag them in a brush pile, you might chuck them up in a tree, cast them off, whatever. It happens all the time. Happens to people that are experienced with them, happens to people that have never thrown them. It's just going to happen. That's okay. It's a lot more digestible with a $30 bait than with a $100 bait. I'm going to really quickly run through some of these baits that I would highly recommend for like a beginner glide bait. Some of them that I think are perfect for you to learn on. Obviously, everybody talks about the S-Waver. They're great. They have a pretty wide, predictable glide like I was talking about earlier. They're a slow sink. They're, whatever that is, 5.5, 6 inches, something like that. So it's going to be right in that kind of comfortable range. They're pretty lightweight. You can chuck them on a jig rod. I've got a jig rod that I throw these guys on, and it feels like I'm chucking a chatterbait. I mean, they're lightweight. They get bit. They don't swim super fast. You can't burn them in. You can't chop them real hard. But they do have that slow, wide, predictable glide, and they just get bit. This is a great place to start. I would highly recommend this to a lot of you guys. They're cheap and easy to come by. You'll like them. One that's very similar is this Savage Gear. I don't even know what they call it, but it's a Savage Gear glide bait. It's pretty much the same profile as this River to Sea S-Waver. And something like this works pretty good. I really like this one, actually. What I don't like is the hooks that come on it. So if you've got a spare set of hooks laying around somewhere to throw on there, you'll like it a lot better. You'll land a lot more fish. But this guy is a little bit cheaper than the S-Waver even, and it's a fantastic bait as well to start with. You know, I was talking about like a slow wide glide, and these two here kind of differ from that a little bit. I mean, they'll still do it on like a steady retrieve, but these are a choppy style bait is what they're going to call them. So whenever you give them reel inputs, they chop hard, and you can chop them pretty fast, both of them. This is a Savage Gear 3D Shine Glide. This is a 7-inch bait, a little bit bigger, but still not crazy, not too difficult to throw. I chuck these on the same jig rod that I do the S-Wavers on. These guys are fantastic. They do burn out at high speeds, but this is probably my #1 recommendation for a beginner glide bait. It's just a fantastic bait. I still fish them now, even though I've got 100 other baits behind me, and I'm a big fan of these. This is the exact color, size, everything that I gained almost all of my initial glide bait fishing confidence in is this guy right here. I'll pop a picture up on the screen of a great big one that I caught in a college tournament on this that really sealed the deal and showed me how powerful these baits can be. The other one here is a Buka brand 6-inch trick shad. These guys are fantastic. They do everything really, really well. They do have some breakage issues around the tail. He might have fixed them by now, I don't know, but I had some issues with some of them. If it wasn't for that, this would be my #1. They're an amazing bait, amazing starter bait. Luckily, their customer service is top notch. You can send them, or you can shoot them an email, and they replaced mine that I broke. So because it's a known flaw with them, but they're a fantastic bait if you didn't have to deal with that. One that I think is a great bait, but should wait until it's your second or third bait because of the sink rate. It's a little fast. Is the Spro KGB Chad Shad. I absolutely love this bait. It's a little bit heavier than all the others that I've got here, and it does sink a little bit faster to where it's pretty difficult to fish if you can't visualize what it's doing under the water. But for your second or third, this is a fantastic bait, and I'm only adding it in here because a lot of people will recommend this for a beginner bait, but I would say kind of stay away from it until you have some confidence. One more that kind of goes against some of the stuff that I said, but I think it's worth mentioning, is this guy right here. This is a Jackal Gantarelle Jr. I like the junior size whenever you're starting out because you can chuck this guy on like a 7-foot medium heavy. I throw this guy on my chatterbait rod. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. It's kind of heavy for it, but you can do it. Now, this guy goes against two of the things that I said. It's a 3-piece, double-jointed bait, so it's harder to control, and it floats. So, a couple of them there, but them fins are at a slight downward angle to where it does dive. Not very far, but it does dive, and it's pretty hard to get a predictable glide, but being that it stays so close to the surface, you can just kind of reel and pause and let the bait do the work, and you're going to get bit on something like this. This thing just draws bites. And being that it floats, you don't really have to worry about losing it all that much. I love this bait. That's why I threw it in here. I wish that I would have got one of these sooner and fished with it sooner, and I think I would have gained some confidence earlier on. And if you're like worried about the size of these things, like you're lacking some confidence in them because they're too big or whatever, there's an S-Waver next to Reactions Innovations Vixen. Like, this is just a standard spook, you know, and it's right next to that S-Waver. They're basically the same size, and if they're willing to come out of the water to eat something, come up and eat it on the surface, they'd probably also be willing to eat something like this. Like, they're not that much bigger, and the little bit of size that is there, I mean, they have to come out of the water for this guy, and this guy gets smoked. So if you've got some confidence throwing like a full-size spook, then you'll do just fine with something like this. Now, whenever you do get one of these baits and you start throwing it around, the confidence is going to come from putting the bait in the right places. You know, wherever the fish are located at the time, that's where you're going to want to fish them. You know, I could read you off a list of places that I've caught caught fish on glide baits, but if they're in the grass, then follow the weed edges. If they're in the brush piles, toss them in and around the brush piles. Not in, but over top and around the brush piles. If they're hanging onto dock pilings, throw them there. Just wherever the fish are, go and chuck them around there. You're going to want to kind of key in on high percentage areas. So like the first and last boat dock on a row of docks, or in a weird corner that might hold a fish, or whatever. If there's a big hole in a section of pads, go chuck it around in there. Your confidence in these is really going to come from knowing how they swim and toss them in the right places. And as soon as you get that first bite, it completely changes your world on how you view these things, and really opens up the possibilities. Something to really think about here is, like, as I've kind of experimented with different big baits, a lot of times if you're going to be throwing, like, this is Dangerous Shad, Bass Mafia Dangerous Shad, if you're going to be throwing like this guy, a lot of times in like a lower wind, this seems to work better for me, and then in a higher wind, I'll go with something like this. So if you've got waves crashing on the bank, well, maybe not this color, but a glide bait, just something to break up that body a little bit more. I really like throwing them in high wind. I caught some of my best glide bait fish last year just throwing them up on wind-blown banks, just like you chuck a chatterbait or a spinnerbait or anything else. Same concept. It's a moving bait. You're supposed to be imitating forage, and they do well at it. Let's talk about your retrieve when you're starting out. Keep it simple. I know if you guys are watching like Jeffrey the King, like he's doing some crazy stuff with them, or whoever you're watching. They do crazy stuff. They slap around on the top of the water. They figure eight them, whatever. Keep it simple. Slow reel turn. Give it an occasional pause. A slow reel turn. Give it a pause. Don't give it any aggressive rod snaps or anything like that. No big rod inputs. Most of all, just let the bait do the work. Especially if you're fishing like the S-Waver or something like that. If you are fishing something like this, then I do like to give it some reel inputs, and I feel like I can trigger a lot of bites that way. So do your regular reel for a while, and then at some point just give it like a fast half turn and pause. Fast half turn and pause. And that's how I kind of like to work these guys. You don't need to do that with the S-Waver. That'll make it roll a little bit. It's not the most stable glide bait, but just for a reel and pause, it's a great one. Like I said, you're going to want to let the bait do the work for the most part. You can do all the fancy stuff you want, but until you really learn how to fish them and what the fish want, then a lot of times you're just going to be hurting your chances of catching those fish. Not saying that there's times that kind of stuff doesn't work, because there certainly is, but it's just not going to be a great way to build your confidence from the start. Some common beginner mistakes that you're going to want to avoid if you want to progress way faster in the glide bait game. You're going to want to avoid overworking the bait, like I was just talking about. You're going to want to slow it down. That's with everything whenever you're learning something. A lot of guys want to fish it too fast, so just slow it down, hang out. A lot of guys start way too big, just like I talked about with that guy up there. That's way too big for, I don't even know now if I have a rod that can handle that one. I mean, it's just a really heavy bait. And then, like obviously something like these guys, they take some commitment to get bit on. They take some time of working them and learning how they're gonna react and all this different stuff. So a lot of guys just end up making the mistake of giving up too early. I like to go out there, lock it in my hand, and just fish it until I feel really comfortable with it. That's almost any time that I get a new glide bait or a new big swim bait in general, is just go, lock it in your hand, and see what happens. Glide baits aren't magic, but they do show the fish something different. Start simple, build your confidence up, and the big bites will come. If this helped you, hit that like button, comment down below if you would like to see any more big swim bait breakdowns, maybe wake baits. I got a pile of them here that I absolutely love. I'd be happy to make something like that, or whatever you guys would want to see, just let me know. Make sure you guys are subscribed for more kayak fishing and swim bait related content. As many of you probably know, pretty well iced in here right now. Had a little bit of snow, a lot of ice on all the lakes. Been doing a little bit of ice fishing. Video might be coming soon on that. We'll see. But soon we'll be getting back out onto open water, counting down the days until tournament season starts. Getting really excited, and then we're back to the regular scheduled programming. plus maybe some tip videos thrown in. Might keep up with these, especially because it seems like you guys like them. Thank you all so much for watching. I'll see y'all next time.